Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the third episode of our Propeller series entitled Perfecting Your Pitch with Eamon Curtin. Eamon, thank you for taking the time this morning to join us here in Ludgate, although you're remote and we're still operating in a virtual environment, which I think suits most at this early hour in the morning. So I hope everybody has a cup of tea or coffee in hand. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Fiona Ryan, a startup and entrepreneurship manager here with the Ludgate Hub in Skibbereen. The Ludgate Hub, for those that are unfamiliar with the hub here, is a 10,000 square foot co-working space in Skibbereen, of which we have many pillars here. So we have our education pillar, which enables digital transformation within our schools, of which we have 16 primary and 3 secondary. We've installed Google for Education, Microsoft 365. We've enabled the distribution of 3,000 laptops, or 300 laptops, I should say, to those schools. And we've also run several Silver Surfers camps. So really enabling digital transformation right through the community and right through those generations. In terms of myself, the startup pillar, I've enabled various supports for startups to be successful within our region since I came on board in September of 2021. Those being marketing and sales support, strategy and business planning advice, financial advice through our partners. Before I go on, I must say that some of your cameras are turned on. Feel free to leave them on. It's nice to see some faces. However, if you want to turn them off, by all means do. We've got chat here, and if you'd like to put any questions, and we would encourage that, we'd encourage that engagement. Put your questions through the chat. If you see somebody you know within the panel here, by all means, put your email, or you want to connect with them, by all means do that. So we'd encourage that sort of interaction, and I'll go through those questions with Eamon then after his presentation. I know he has a nice slide deck for us this morning where he'll be talking about the do's and don'ts of pitching, what makes a perfect pitch, how do you align it to the person who you're going to be pitching to, and also what do you do in those scenarios where it may be you've set yourself up for a formal pitch, but it may become very informal. It may be at a networking event, you may have 30 seconds. And what exactly do you say, or what exactly do you get across in those 30 seconds in order to make an impact? So I hope you enjoy this morning. Eamon, firstly, I'll introduce Eamon. Eamon Curtin is director at Ignite in UCC, an award-winning startup incubation program for recent graduates. And over the last 20 years, Eamon has worked with many hundreds of founders and business owners as mentor and advisor, and has supported thousands of aspiring entrepreneurs through startup training programs. So thanks, Eamon, again for taking the time this morning. I'm going to hand it over to you. I think you have about 35 minutes of a presentation, and at which point then we'll break into the questions and answers. So thanks again, Eamon.
Wonderful. Fiona, thanks a million, guys. Thanks for the opportunity to talk this morning. And it's great to see some familiar names and familiar faces come up on the screen there in front of me. So always nice to see that. Would be lovely to be there, but then as I got up this morning and came to work and saw the snow coming down, I kind of thought actually coming as far as the Western Gateway building was probably a better stretch than trying to make it down to Skibbereen this morning. So as Fiona says, we can sit in the quiet warmth of our offices and homes perhaps, and have that cup of coffee and engage over the course of the next 45 minutes or thereabouts. Just as Fiona was saying, I'm director of Ignite. I've been running the program here in UCC for the last 10 years, and it very specifically is about helping recent graduate entrepreneurs to develop new startup businesses. I spent 10 years before that as a self-employed management consultant, and I spent 17 years before that working with a number of different US multinational companies. And I guess my experience when it comes to pitches and presentations would have started preparing and delivering customer pitches, work with multinational companies, customer pitches and sales pitches, preparing, delivering my own sales pitches as it came to building up my own consultancy business, advising clients through that on how they would develop their own investment pitches, and indeed listening to hundreds of startup pitches over the last number of years as people have come and pitched to our program. So let me just get my slides shared here, guys. Just give me a thumbs up to let me know that that's working okay, Fiona.
Perfect, Eamon.
Wonderful. Thanks a million. Thanks a million. So, and I got to talk. I thought a small bit about this. So the theme is perfecting your pitch. And one of the things I did is I did a quick Google on pitching your startup idea, and there's 304 million results. So there's no shortage of advice out there on top 7 tips, top 10 tips, top 5 tips, you name it, it's all out there. Startup, investment, sales tips. So really what I wanted to take is maybe a small number of topics, advice, I guess, the key points that I've come across over the last number of years, and maybe share some stories along the way that can just help you to put the icing on the cake in terms of your pitch. Emphasize that, but clearly we'll cover some of the basics as we go along as well. And as I said, just try to illustrate that with some stories. I think the first thing, and forgive me there for just a moment, is to think about what the common pitch settings are. And for many of us, when we think about startups, when we think about business, we automatically think about maybe sales pitches or funding pitches. So, and for funding, maybe in the context of grants, we're pitching to the local enterprise office. Maybe we're pitching to Enterprise Ireland for a competitive start fund. Maybe we're pitching to angel investors, either pitching to them individually, pitching to syndicates, pitching to something like Cork Big here in Cork or the H-Band network, or indeed pitching to VCs. In terms of sales, we're pitching to customers, and there's different phases of that, and we'll talk maybe a small bit about that. But we might also be pitching for awards and competitions, and they become a very valuable way for businesses to gain reputation, to gain credibility, to get exposure, and possibly even to earn a prize funding that can be important in developing a business. Perhaps pitching to accelerators and incubation programs to get places on those programs that can, again, perhaps provide some equity funding or provide the support that's needed. And indeed, some enterprises may also be looking at things from a social or impact perspective, and actually it's about pitching for sponsorship and donations. And indeed, even job interviews, I think, are all part of the general pitching need right now. And it may well be that at some point in time you're looking at a job situation, and sometimes within those job interview situations it's about pitching and presenting ideas that you might have and that you might take into the role. So there's lots of different ways that we're really looking at where pitches come into play, I think. I think the first thing I'd say is it's important to set your goals. There's the good outcome, which is really what you're kind of planning to get from it. This is what we're here. We're here to move on to the next step of the investment process, perhaps. There's the great outcome. Just if you think things are going particularly well, let's start to shift that target up slightly. Excuse that. And start to focus on what would be an ideal outcome from this conversation. And I've kind of fudged this one. I've called it get by. I just wanted to get another G in there. It's probably not a particularly good phrase to put in it, but what I really mean is what's the minimum outcome that you want to get out of that pitch, that you want to get out of that engagement, that you want to get out of that discussion. So sitting down right at the start and saying a good outcome from an investment conversation is that we get moved on to the next level. A great outcome is that the investor says, I'm going to give you the money straight away. And a get by outcome is that the investor says, it's not really for me, but I'm prepared to introduce to somebody who might be a better investor for you. So just to think about what your core objectives are. So in that context of good, great, and get by is maybe a framework to use for that. In thinking about that, then it's about understanding who your audience is. And so what are the names of the people that are going to be part of that panel that you're pitching to? What experience do they have? I think probably one of my first experiences, and these scars can run deep sometimes. Sometimes it's still one of those things that comes back at me, and this was nearly 25 years ago, I'd say. But pitching to a customer where I was meeting the chief executive of the company, but not realizing that the chief executive had up until relatively recently been the chief technology officer, and really wanted to have a very in-depth conversation about the technology that we're offering. And that really wasn't my space. And if I'd taken a small bit of time to look at the background of the individual, I might just as well have made sure that my principal engineer came with me, and that if that's the way the conversation went, we would have been able to deal with those conversations too. So while the pitch situation itself wasn't about getting into detailed technology conversations, if I'd looked at the experience in the individual, I might have anticipated that and been better prepared for that situation. So what is the experience? What are the roles of the individuals that are sitting around the table? So in an Enterprise Ireland competitive start fund type of scenario, for example, typically there's going to be someone there representing with an investment background. There's going to be someone there with a sectoral background, and there's going to be someone there from an Enterprise Ireland staff member looking at it from their perspective. So identifying who these individuals are, what sectors they're coming from. And you should be able to ask these questions as to who will be part of the panel in those kinds of scenarios. And what are their preferred styles? Now, this can be a little more difficult to get at, but there are going to be people who are going to respond well to numbers. They want it quantified. There are going to be people who will respond to detail. They want the confidence that comes from detail to believe that you can actually deliver on what you're going to deliver on. But then there's going to be other people that they actually want to feel good about the situation. They work on a gut instinct. They like to be building a relationship. Sometimes you'll understand some of this when you listen to the language that people use. You know, people will talk about how they feel about it. I feel this presentation went very well versus I think this presentation went very well. That'll give you some kind of a sense as to what that person's preferred style is. You're probably all familiar with personality profiles. And so there's it's interesting just to read up a small bit on personality profiles and just use it to see, can you infer what a person's preferred style might be, and then be able to give them what they're looking for. So talk to one person about the numbers, talk to somebody else about how the impact is going to have and how people are going to feel by benefiting from the product or service that you have to offer. And sometimes the roles that people fill will lead you towards that. So if you know someone is a qualified accountant, they're more likely to have one preferred style. If you know someone is coming from a HR background, they're more likely to have, not guaranteed, but more likely to have a different preferred style. And then how can you take that into your account? So knowing your audience, knowing who they are, knowing what their background and experience is, knowing the roles that they play within the panel session. I might just come back to one of that, and the preferred style. And also, if I just finish on that role piece, and particularly in a sales situation, typically the roles there's going to be the person who wants or who is going to use the product or service that you have to offer. There's probably going to be someone who's going to be writing a check and they need to be convinced. You always got to watch out for what's sometimes referred to as the saboteur, the person who actually is going to make their life more difficult if your product or service is taken on board. Maybe it's going to be a threat to them. And so you need to anticipate these different roles that people are going to play around the table and be able to bring them with you, to address the potential concerns that they might have. It sounds like it costs too much. It sounds like it's going to take too much support. It sounds like it's going to undermine my authority. It sounds like it might even weaken my case for building my team. And be able to address the particular concerns or the needs that they have in that regard. So just understanding the name, the experience, roles, and preferred styles. It's possible to engage in advance, but with a bit of care. So if you know the people who are going to be on a panel, reaching out to them beforehand, maybe it's a connection on LinkedIn or something like that, that just gets them the opportunity to maybe look at you in advance, see how you present yourself, maybe look at your website, and possibly even lead to some kind of a connection. But I would say to be taking some care about that. I had, I suppose, just two examples, one that worked particularly well and one that, you know, it's not that it didn't work. Well, it didn't work. It wasn't a particularly bad situation, but in someone that I knew was going to be on a pitch panel, I reached out to them beforehand. They hadn't yet made the connection on that, so they came back and said to be very happy to meet. I said that would be great to meet. I put a comment back to them about setting up a date, and then before I came to the meeting, I popped them an email and say, actually, I see that we're probably going to meet next week, and that just gave them the opportunity to come back and say, actually, Eamon, in that regard, it's probably better off that we don't meet. That's perfectly fine. They might have been comfortable with us meeting, and that would have been a valuable opportunity for me to develop that one-to-one connection before the meeting. In another situation, it was pitching to a much bigger panel. I knew there was a central figure on that panel, and I popped an email to them in advance and told them something about what we were doing. And when I came in and then to pitch, that person's first comment was, "So I hear you do some fantastic work. Tell me about what you're doing." So they only heard about it because I had popped them an email beforehand to tell them that. But that then just created a platform within which you build that. So sometimes it can work, sometimes it mightn't work. It's worth thinking about, but be wary about that as to how you might address them or connect with the audience beforehand. Knowing the setup is all important, guys, and we've had so many changes about this over the last number of years too, as we moved into COVID, and we're moving again out of COVID, and thankfully we can have more in-person events again. But definitely you want to understand where the location is, what is the timing, and by timing I mean not just when does it start, but also how long is it going to last. And think about some pitch situations. Perhaps you're pitching to investors, you're pitching to Enterprise Ireland. They're going to see a sequence of 8, 10 or 12 pitches over the course of the day. Like a 5-minute delay in every one of those is an hour late at the end of the day. So they're not even going to take that kind of a leeway on it. So if you've got 10 minutes to pitch and it's a 5-minute presentation and a 5-minute Q&A, then they're the guidelines you need to work within, and be prepared to work within that. Need to think about the technology clearly. And you know, have you got a laptop? Have you got a Mac? Is it an iPad? What kind of connectivity do they have? Is it a HDMI? Is it a good old-fashioned VGA? Do they have good broadband access? All of those kinds of practical things. And I guess the bottom point then has plan A, B, C, and D. Have all kinds of plans in place to ensure that no matter what happens, you've got a backup in place. And then just to understand the format, is it in person, is it online? One of the difficult ones to work at the moment is where we're seeing more and more hybrid stuff. So you're both sitting in a room with a number of people, and then you're also pitching to a number of people who are on the screen. That can actually make it difficult. Do you address the people in the room, or do you address the camera and the people on the screen? And how do you manage that kind of thing? So understanding the setup and being prepared for that. And we'll maybe come back to that. 1 or 2 comments around that later on. Now we're really getting into preparing the message. So what's the core message that I want to get across? And I won't get into too much detail on this. There's lots of wonderful stuff online on it. But clearly for an investment, you want to be talking about the size of the market opportunity. How big is it? And what evidence do you have that customers are prepared to pay for a solution on that? Do you have a defendable solution? Do you have a solution? Do you have a defendable solution? Do you have a solution that has unique properties over any of the other solutions that are out there? Do you have a strong team in place? And what financial return can they expect to get? So you got to cover off those basic points. Right? But you might be looking to pitch up for a grant. So I'm thinking local enterprise office, maybe even a competitive start fund, as I talked about from Enterprise Ireland. And again, the opportunity, the solution, and the team are going to be important there. But the jobs is what's really going to matter when it comes to grants. So do you have a clear, these are the jobs that we're going to create, and these are the roles that we're going to create, and these are the potential salaries that could be coming from, because those grant structures in that context are very much geared at job creation. And if it's a sales pitch, what are the financial and non-financial benefits that the customer is going to receive from using the product or service that you have to offer? It's important to understand with some of these too that there are criteria to be met. Okay, and I'm going to say that this is going to vary from perhaps a situation where you're meeting an investor, and actually they're happy to make a decision based on the conversation they've had, and they're not accountable to anybody else, and they don't have to provide any evidence to support the decision that they made. It's their money and they're making an investment decision. And that's fine. But you're also going to find that you're meeting people who are representing investors, and they need to have some evidence, some data that they can bring back to the investor to say, I think you should talk to this person, and here is why. They've got a strong market opportunity. They've got a defendable solution. They've got a strong team. So you need to be able to tick those boxes for them to make it easy for them to come back and to communicate that message back. Then we're going to see some situations, and it's often going to be in the public sector sphere where there's specific criteria. And you really just need to tell people that you meet those criteria. They're not going to go looking for that. So if there's an Enterprise Ireland HPSU potential, you know, do you create 10 jobs and do €1 million turnover within the next 3 years? You've got to state that that's what you're aiming to do. You can't say, well, it'll be 8 jobs and €950,000 and hope that they can infer that actually, well, that's nearly 10 and nearly $1 million. So let's consider this application further. So it's very important to understand what the specific criteria might be in that your audience, that the panelists are looking for, and make sure that you make it very easy for them to see that you meet that criteria. So going to setup, we talked about preparing materials, and it's about a slide deck perhaps, and you're presenting in a situation like this. It's having it on your laptop. It's a memory stick that's coming with that. It's being able to access stuff online. You don't want to rely on fast broadband access. I know you've got it down there in Ludgate, which is fantastic, but not every place has it. And you don't want to do anything too smart, I'm going to say. We'll see many people come in and pitch ideas to us, and they'll have gone to a lot of trouble to create some kind of an animated graphic or a video or something like that. And then when it comes to pressing the button on it, it just doesn't work. And actually what it has done is it impacted their flow in terms of their pitch. It disturbs it, it undermines their confidence likely, it undermines the momentum that they've had in the pitch up to that point in time. And actually it wasn't worth putting the time and effort into preparing it and then trying to make it run. So just to be mindful of those kinds of things. And if you are going to try something like that, be very quick to say it's not working and move on, and almost do that without drawing too much attention to it. There may well be, we're seeing less and less of it, but there may well be situations where you need to provide some kind of a physical piece of materials, a handout or something else, and just to make sure that that is relevant to what you're doing. We had a startup a number of years ago working broadly in the political space, and they would have been very strongly connected or had some good connections in one political party, and had some nice photographs taken, and those photographs were included in their promotion material. They got a really valuable, useful opportunity to pitch their idea to the other political party, shall we say. And they had all these lovely prepared brochures, and they were able to go up to Leinster House and meet the parliamentary party and pass out the brochures. And of course, there in the back of the brochure was a picture of the promoter with the leader of the other party, and there was eyebrows raised around the counter, around the table. And it was amusing and humorous enough. I mean, it wasn't in the situation, but nevertheless, it was the kind of thing that you're thinking, who's my audience? What's the material do I have, and does it align properly with them? Now, no harm done in that case, but just to be thinking about that. I think the last thing to think about is your website and social media and other activity. One of the big challenges over the last number of years is that everybody in the audience now has the opportunity to check in real time if what you say or what you claim is actually correct or not. So the first thing is that you make sure that your website is looking shipshape and aligns with what you're doing. So you go in to pitch an idea, someone is sitting in the room and they're looking at their phone, they're looking at their laptop, they take a quick look at your domain and it doesn't quite look as professional as you would like it to look, and that undermines your pitch. And then similarly, your social media activity. And being mindful as well about both your personal social media activity and your business social media activity. So they need to align. If you're coming in pitching an idea and they're looking at your social media activity, and your social media activity are maybe sharing personal views on stuff that might not align with your business, we want to be careful about that as well. And clearly then you need to manage news items. I mean, there's just so much opportunity now to get content about your business by way of news up online. So someone now Googles news in relation to the business idea, your startup idea, and they see some content that has come through from time to time. You want to curate that so that what they're seeing is consistent with your business. It's showing that you've got the appropriate opinions, perhaps. It's talking about awards or competitions that are relevant to you that you've won. It's talking about clients that you've secured, those types of things. So just being very aware that now your audience has access to everything that's online, and they're going to be able to view that in parallel with you making your pitches at that point in time. And it needs to be consistent. So you need to manage that. What I would say is to have an ask. So to be very clear on, you've understand who these people are, you've done some research, you know what they might be able to do to support you, and that you've got a very specific ask that you're prepared when the opportunity is there to look for. And so that ask might be a follow-up meeting, or that ask might be a specific introduction. And the more specific that you could be, the better. So I see that you're connected with so-and-so. Could you or would you be able to introduce me to them? Or I'm looking for connections in particular industries. And I guess I have a simple idea that anytime you're in a situation where you're meeting people, there's an opportunity to build your network. You should be, in the nicest possible way, looking to take advantage of that opportunity. Or it might be just to ask for some advice. So guys, you've now heard my pitch. What single piece of advice would you offer me in terms of how I develop my business, or maybe even in terms of how I develop my pitch? There's a great phrase as a slight aside, but it's, if you want advice, ask for finance, and if you want finance, ask for advice. And so there can often come a point in time where you say, hey, I'm looking to pitch, I'm pitching my business, I'm looking to raise some money. Can you give me some advice on the pitch? And that may well turn into a conversation about finance. Whereas if you come into someone asking, I'm now looking to raise some money, what you might get back is, well, my advice to you is such and such. So there's a slight aside to think about that one. But go back to my core point here, always have an ask, and an ask that you know that the panelists, someone within the panel, someone within the audience can deliver on, and take the opportunity to do that if you can. We're going to talk briefly about the big day, and by the big day I mean then that's the day of the pitch. It's where you're presenting. Maybe you're presenting online, maybe you're presenting in person, you're traveling to a personal presentation, or you're preparing in your office, your home environment, whatever that might be for an online pitch. I guess the first thing I'd say is to be focused. And again, there's a guy that does a lot of work for us here on Ignite. One of his resounding comments is, never stop for coffee on the way to a sales meeting. And what he really means by that is that you should be putting so much effort into preparing for a sales meeting that you're not prepared to risk it going wrong by buying a cup of coffee and spilling it all down the front of your shirt. In essence, that's it. So don't do anything that's going to distract you from that. So never stop for coffee on the way to a sales meeting. Have all the coffee you want on the way home again afterwards. That's just fine. I think the second thing is to be on message right from the start. One of the startups we worked with a number of years ago, and they received finance, they received investment from a private investor. And the deal was they went and met the guy in his office. They arrived in reception, they met the receptionist, they sat down in the kind of two seats in front of her desk for a while. Then he was available to meet them, and on they went, and they had a great meeting, and they came out. But he subsequently told them that one of the things that he did was he went out and he talked to the receptionist, and he said, what were those guys like when they were talking to you? And she said they were great, really nice guys, came across really professionally, very personable, all of that kind of stuff. And that was an important factor in his decision. He wasn't looking for someone that, I guess the personalities were important, but he wanted to know that they weren't personalities that they turned on for the investment pitch, but that actually that wasn't the way he behaved outside of that. So he turned out deliberately created that situation so that he could get a sense as to what these guys were like when they were switched off, so to speak, when they weren't in pitch mode. And it worked out for them because they're two great guys. But just that idea about being on message, like that you always want to be on message, because you don't know who else you're engaging with, who is going to influence the decision, even though it's not necessarily obvious to you at that point in time they're going to engage with the decision. And I think the last one is, and this is one of the stories maybe that Fiona referred to earlier on, is about being agile. And again, going back a number of years ago, I advised a guy on an investment pitch, and he had a great opportunity to pitch to one of Ireland's most successful entrepreneurs, who has successfully exited out of a number of startups. And so this was a big opportunity. He was going to get it once, and he put stuff I talked about earlier on in terms of understanding the guy's background, in terms of getting the pitch, the messaging, in terms of preparing the slide deck, in terms of understanding the timing, and working it through, and practice, and all of that kind of stuff. Went to the guy's office. The guy met him at the door, brought him in, and said, "Fantastic, so can't wait to hear about your startup idea. Why don't you sit down over here and you can tell me all about it." So he found himself sitting down in a big soft sofa side by side of the guy, with no laptop, no technology, no slide deck, nothing else, and it was just purely, "So tell me what you're planning to do." And so I'm going to say the preparation that the guy had put in allowed him to be able to respond in that situation. But it just took him a small while to kind of reorientate and go, "Okay, this isn't what I was expecting. I'm not prepared for this, but this is the only opportunity I'm going to get, and I just need to take it now." So you got to be agile. You got to recognize that sometimes situations are going to change. And again, I'll go back to my comment about, I suppose, the difference between maybe an investor who is investing their own money, and they can be quite flexible in how the conversation goes and what they want to hear from you, versus maybe someone that's representing a grant giving body or representing an investor, and they need to be a bit more structured about the fact that they've gathered the right data on all of the applicants perhaps that they're meeting in order to be able to rate or rank or whatever they need to do. So there's going to be different situations. They need to be agile and prepared to respond to those as they come along. I think in terms of the conversation itself, it's about engaging the audience, introducing yourself. Surprise the amount of people that come into us when they're presenting and don't tell us what their name is. Now, we know what their name is because we know they're coming in, they've got it written down. But that they don't tell us what their name is. And that just begins to create that early part of a relationship. And the most effective are the ones that come in and they go around the table and shake hands and actually, "Hi, I'm Tom, hi, I'm Tom, hi, I'm Tom," and they get the names and they use the names back. That establishes a relationship. And guys, if there's one thing I would say, business is based on relationships. You all know that. So you need to establish that relationship. Eye contact is important. Physical contact, when it's appropriate, is important. Using body language, the guys were just talking about the fact that I'm presenting standing up here, that just gives me the opportunity to be a bit more expressive. I'm more energetic standing up like this than I am sitting down. So are you in a situation where you can use body language? Can you create a situation where you can use body language? As I talked about earlier on, playing to people preferred styles. So if you have some insights as to who's interested in facts and figures, who's interested in more maybe of the emotional side of stuff, and that you can address those relevant comments to that. And then clarify the next steps. What is going to happen next, and who is that action with, and within what time frame do you expect it to happen? I think one of the things to think about here too is oftentimes that pitches are going to be structured as time to pitch and time for a Q&A. And you want to manage the time for the Q&A right. And you want to make sure that you're well able to address the question. So I guess a couple of things I'll say there is you definitely don't want to bullshit anything. And you'll get caught out very quickly. And particularly in the context of the fact that people have access to online content at this point in time. So if you say, "No, there is nobody else in Ireland doing this," it's very easy to Google that in real time and tell you that you're wrong. So if you're not sure about the answer to the question, absolutely don't state the answer. Nothing wrong at all with saying, not sure about that, but I'll find it out and I'll come back to you. Nothing wrong either with maybe some guiding some of the questions. So throughout the presentation, if you're talking about marketing or you're talking about finance or you're talking about the team, that you can just indicate, and I'd be pleased to provide more details on that during the Q&A. That makes it easy for a member of the panelists then to start with the easy question. So you mentioned earlier on about the team, can you give me some more detail on that? And you're going, that's absolutely fantastic, because guess what? I asked you to ask me that question, and I'm all well prepared for that. So just think about how you use the Q&A in relation to that. And just the couple of last ones, guys. I'm following up. Always say thanks for the opportunity. If you can find the contact details, and you should be able to get those if it's an email or you're reaching out to them on LinkedIn or whatever other relevant social media channel there might be, just to follow up, to connect. Ireland is a small business community, and everybody you're going to meet, in all likelihood, you're going to meet again. So nothing wrong at all with connecting with people and continuing to build relationships. And even though that pitch mightn't work particularly well, or mightn't have produced the outcome that you were looking for, there's going to be another opportunity. You're going to meet those people again. So build the relationships. And then follow up on as agreed. So if it was that you were going to do something within a period of time, that you do that within that period of time. If they were expected to do something within a period of time, nothing wrong with popping an email to say, hey, just to say, guys, thanks a million for the opportunity to pitch last week. If you have any further questions, happy to take that, and I look forward to hearing from you next Friday as we agreed, or whatever it might have been from that. So follow up is a hugely valuable opportunity, and we can sometimes miss it out because we just go, okay, that's the pitch done, and we lose sight of the real maybe value that comes from the connections that come afterwards. And as I said, even though the objective of the pitch mightn't have been achieved, there's always going to be other benefits. So think about that get by goal that you might set for yourself. So just, guys, in summary, I'm happy to take questions then on any aspect that we've just talked through. But in summary, I'd say prepare well. Yeah, understand the audience, understand the location, be clear on what your message is, prepare your content, be focused on what you're achieving in that meeting itself. Don't get distracted. Don't allow, I'm going to say, silly use of technology to get in your way. Keep it nice and simple, and follow up effectively.
Great, thanks so much, Eamon. I think what really resonated with me is in terms of the background of the individual, know who you're pitching to, the preferred styles. So you may know their preferred styles by watching them in action previously. So I suppose doing a little bit of research as to what style that they prefer, be convincing and know your timelines. As you said, if you're going for a HPSU funding, know who's possibly going to be on that panel that you're going to be pitching to. And yes, you've got your introductory remarks, you may have your presentation, know the exact timelines and where you need to cut off each point, and to prepare your materials as well. And if something doesn't work, as it happens from time to time, that you know when to move on, and to move on in a confident manner, which can be difficult, because I know when something doesn't play and it doesn't work and technology lets us down, that can really burst our bubble in a way. What I didn't like now was that you can't stop for the coffee on the way, so that's one that I need to work on for sure.
You can take the approach. Some of you may be Jason Statham fans in The Transporter. And every time he gets into a fight, he then has a fresh white shirt and a fresh suit in the boot of the car that he then puts on and moves on again. So if you want to have a change of clothes, that's going to work just fine too.
I think that's probably going to be my tact, all right. So Eamon, we do have a few questions in. So we have one here from Kieran, and he's saying, Eamon, when speaking of the value proposition, can you talk about the specific language that you need to use. Now, I do think that you touched on value proposition in terms of the unique properties of the solution, focusing in on the team and maybe the key skills that you have on the team, the financial return, the job creation, which is really important for especially EI funding. So is there any specific language that you would hone in on in your pitch?
Yeah, I'm going to Kieran, thanks for the question. Actually, I think the most important thing there is that you use the language of the customer, or you use the language of the audience. And so one of the things that we would find is that people begin to use startup related language. So they talk about lean canvas, and they talk about MVP, and they talk even about unique value proposition. And not everybody understands what that is. So I think if you're talking in from a, let's say, a startup pitching for finance type of situation, that you're very clear on these customers have this problem that's costing them this amount of money, and we can solve it in this way. One of the businesses we worked with a number of years ago was a business called Ludgate, and they are developing, and they have launched an online business management platform for the fitness industry. But in their early stages, their early target market were self-employed fitness professionals. But they went out and talked to lots of self-employed fitness professionals. And one of the things they were asking them is, how many hours a week do you spend managing your business? And they came back with a number that said, typically these people spend 4 hours a week managing their business, 4 hours a week, taking phone calls, taking bookings, managing cancellations, taking payments, those kinds of things. And their proposition was that if we can have that for them, that's 2 hours a week more that they can spend working with clients. And if they can earn €50 more from each of those hours, that's €100 a week that they can earn more. That's €5,000 a year. So that was their value proposition. We can put €5,000 more in your pocket every year. Okay, so that isn't about understanding language. That's about very simply saying, what's important to you? Money. I can help you make more money. Here's how I'm going to do it. So I think that's how I be making it as simple as possible and really bring it down to brass tacks and using the language of the audience.
Perfect. Thank you, Eamon. We've one in here from Dan. Do you have advice, Eamon, when asked about the exit strategy for the business when seeking investment? Good one.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one. Yeah, where do I start with that? There are going to be certain kinds of businesses where you can indicate the kinds of exits based on what other businesses have achieved. So you can kind of indicate this is the space we're getting into, and these kinds of businesses have exited at these valuations over the last 2 or 3 years, right? And that just gives a sense as to what's possible. So that's the first thing I'd say on that. The truth is, even with that, I mean, I'm going to say discerning investor will think, well, what happened last year is very different to what might happen in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time. So even that in itself doesn't have a huge degree of relevance, but it does at least indicate that you've got some sense as to what's going to happen. I think the second thing is to think about what's the most appropriate exit then for your business and for your product type. So do you think that it's an exit through acquisition, or do you think that it's an exit through IPO? Now, IPO is a big ask, but if it's acquisition, you need to be able to talk about who the potential acquirers are and why they would be acquiring your business. So are they acquiring it because you've got market share? Are they acquiring it? And there's an interesting one we've seen in the past. Businesses being acquired because the acquirers just wanted to lock them out of the market. You'll sometimes see it in the pharma space, where emerging drug companies will be bought, not because they want the product, because they want to slow it down, because they've got product that's still on patent and they don't want anything impacting that for a period of time yet. So you get those kinds of things. So you're understanding your industry and the dynamics of the industry is very important. I suppose more fundamentally, the question can often be a question of, so, if you're looking for this amount of money for this equity, what valuation will it sell out and what will I make on it then? And to be honest, they're difficult questions to be making, and you can't make any kind of commitment on those kinds of questions. So I would almost, yeah, well, I would say if you're looking at investment conversations, they're the kinds of discussions you want to kick down to a subsequent meeting. You want to get a sense as to how serious the prospective investor is first. But I do think you need to be able to give some indication as to what you think the exit strategy might be, potential valuations, and why you might think that to be the case, and definitely with reference to maybe similar businesses and what they have exited at.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Eamon. Listen, it is 9:16. I do promise to have everybody out at 9:15. Eamon, that was a fantastic slide deck. It's fantastic and very valuable information included in there. So I hope everybody took good quality of information away from this morning. I do have to thank the Ludgate sponsors. That's AIB. I hope everybody can join us, or some of you can join us, for our next Propeller event, which is on the 24th of March. Looking at the art form of communication with Hopkins Communications. We'll have Judy from Hopkins Communication presenting on that particular episode. Thanks once again, Eamon, and thanks to everybody who tuned in this morning. Thank you.
See you all, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye. Have a good day. Bye-bye.